So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Boon Hua, and it's a pleasure to be here in PGVIS for the symposium under the theme Diversity, Unison, Wonderland. And so Bridging Wonderland is kind of the title I was thinking about for this particular research that I'm doing, again with thanks to PGVIM. So this research is still in progress, and so this paper is kind of just showing the methodologies or the thinking behind how I did my research, and it will be completed later this year. So I think one important point about this research is it examines how conducting pedagogy in Asia not only adapted European or American models, but also elevated them in perhaps interesting ways by producing conductors now who are highly visible in international competitions and professional appointments. And this was very different when I was a student maybe 20 years ago, seeing how the landscape has changed. When I was a student, when I looked at conducting competitions, the winners of the conducting competitions back then and now has drastically changed. So I think this is a very interesting point to take note that perhaps there are new trends or there are new thoughts that is very beneficial to this existing new world. Oops. Okay, why Wonderland? And it's perfect with this, with the title of this year's symposium. I think the metaphor of Wonderland is very fitting because in the story, Alice enters a world where the familiar rules no longer apply. And this is very much true for young conductors out there who just graduated from a conducting program, stepping into the industry and realizing nothing they learn in school really works in the real world. It's a few things. And it's very different because if we think about instrumentalists, when you are in school, you learn, for example, chamber music, you learn orchestral excerpts, you learn how to play in an orchestra, right? And so all these skills, you're practicing them actively when you're in school. However, for conductors, it's quite different because the existing framework for conducting pedagogy is quite limited. In many ways, the most part of conducting pedagogy around the world, because of the scarcity of resources, is that you have two pianos, where a conductor conducts two pianos and he goes through repertoire, Beethoven, Mozart, etc. Or they can conduct a string quartet, or maybe a student ensemble, but never a full orchestra. And this is just simply because it is not, in terms of resource allocation, it just doesn't make sense. It's not economical to have a full orchestra that is conducted by a student that could make mistakes. So, because they are always learning in such small frameworks, then how is it for them to replicate their success when they are put in front of a professional orchestra, for example? That's just one instance. Or when they are put in front of a youth orchestra, and then they have to solve problems that they never have to solve with two pianos. So these are the frameworks that we are looking at and understanding how the young conductor coming out of school would have to rethink of certain things to ensure their success later in their career. So I think this makes Asia a very interesting wonderland for conducting pedagogy because there's such a diverse approach to conducting. It's always adapting and it's always developing. So a little bit about myself. Hi, I'm Boon Hua. I'm, as Constance mentioned, I'm artist faculty in Yongsuto Conservatory of Music, where I teach conducting, and I also do the new music ensemble. I'm very happy to be here also this year and last year as a visiting lecturer of large ensembles. So I also teach conducting here as well, and my doctorate is from the Eastman School of Music. And this was interesting because I came from a mainly American training system. And when I was in America, I was quite conscious and quite aware of what was the teaching pedagogy around there. I worked in Europe after that for 2 or 3 years, and I was also exposed to a different kind of approach, and also from kind of working or should I say, doing master classes and having a large European network of friends who are conductors at that point, understanding what are the certain frameworks that each school have that makes their program special. So on top of that, I think what I bring interesting too is I wear many different hats. So on one level, I wear a professional identity. So I'm currently the associate conductor with the Singapore Chinese Orchestra, and I work with professional orchestras on a regular basis. But at the same time too, I work with youth orchestras or school orchestras, and that's completely two different ball games. But I think it's important just to have the skill sets to understand what each ensemble needs. So personally, my research interest right now, because of how the world is shifting in terms of parity. I think previously, like I mentioned, 20 years ago, it was very hard to see Asian conductors conducting at an international stage. I think things have changed tremendously over the last 20 years. And so my research is focused on what made the change. Also, the other thing that was interesting too is in 20 years, almost all the Asian conductors have to study outside of Asia before they can make their mark in the professional world. But these days, there are, for example, conductors who basically did their whole education in China, and then they win a major competition. So I think this sparks a shift in the approaches to conducting pedagogy. And one maybe a important motivation for me was when I was thinking about this course too, I was always trying to think about how do I extract if I have unlimited resources in an ideal world, in Wonderland, I have unlimited resources, what would I do to build a conducting program that could that would be very successful? And thinking of that, I looked at all the different programs, well, a lot of different programs in the region that are successful. And I try to, examine, try to replicate, try to extract what makes them so successful. Obviously, in the real world, these resources are very scarce. For example, there are some schools in China, they have resources to literally pay an orchestra, professional orchestra, for their students to conduct them. This is not the case in many parts of the world, but in certain parts of the world, this is possible. In Europe, too, there are in my recollection, for example, a very prominent school in Switzerland obviously has the resources to pay for orchestras in Eastern Europe for their conductors to go work with them. And whatever it takes to make that, to give the audience, to give the students podium time, or to give students the experience, the school is able to use their resources. So I think in today's world, I think we just have to look at what we have, what could be possible, and what's the best compromise between resources and also outcomes. So with that in mind, with this selfish goal of trying to build the most perfect conducting program, these are some questions that I looked at. How do Asian conservatories adapt European or American conducting pedagogy to their local contexts? What kind of curriculum, rehearsal, or assessment are the most effective when we look around the region? What outcomes do we demonstrate the effectiveness of this adaptation, and what strategies can be identified and transferred? So in many ways, these questions, they move from process of observing and then coming out with what the process is to practice. How do they implement the practice, these ideas to impact? How do we know that these practices have been successful? And then eventually, transferability. How can we then learn from these patterns or these ideas, and how can we replicate that? So in many ways, it's a very clear four-part process. I understand I'm jumping in with full lingo, so please, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. And I also understand, the time for the presentation is very, very short. That's why I'm speeding through this. Case studies, competition, and career highlights. I think, as I mentioned just now, I think what's very interesting is looking at the outcomes. We see the remarkable visibility of Asian conductors on the international platform. So, for example, I think when we talk about conductors in their 30 to 40, which is around my age range, we have a few, very successful names. For example, another classmate of mine, Wong Kar Chun, He was studying in Yongshuto Conservatory of Music. He went to Hans Eisler in Berlin to do his graduate studies. He won the Mahler competition. He's now chief conductor in the Halle Orchestra, and also I think principal guest in the Japan Philharmonic, if I'm not wrong. And also many others around our generation. The one defining thing is most of us do our undergrad in our home country, and then we do our graduate studies in another country, usually in Europe or in America, and that is kind of the pathway for us to get into orchestras. However, when we look at we look at conductors in the 20 to 30 years old, there's this name that pops up quite regularly now, Zhong Jie-in. He's Chinese, and he did all his studies at the Central Conservatory of Music. And he just won the Fiddleberg competition maybe 2 years ago, was a finalist in the Karajan competition this year, and works regularly with Chinese orchestras. So as I mentioned, there's also another person, I think he won third prize in Western Song Competition, did all your education in Shanghai. So now we see a shift. This is no longer, you don't have to go to the West to learn about this. You are able to get a full education being in the East. And this is something that I find very, very attractive, because I feel that there are something we do here that could be different, but could also still be successful. And so with this daily rise of competition winners in this age group, I think that was the spark that got me interested to examine what about these programs that created this success. So for the scope of the research that I'm currently ongoing, we looked at 5 countries in Asia: Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong. Singapore because I teach at Yongshuto, so it's an easy school to put there. Thailand, I'm looking mainly in, of course, PGVIM, where I teach the conducting class here, but also in Mahidol, which is just down the road. They have both a basic conducting class, where most of the students have to take this class, as well as a graduate conducting class, where it's master's and doctorate. In Taiwan, I looked at 2 universities, the National Taiwan Normal University and National Taipei University of Education. Both mainly only have graduate programs. This is the norm in most part of America. In America, I think graduate programs is where most students have the opportunity to start learning conducting. However, in Europe, which is something China has adapted, in Europe there are bachelor's conducting program. And so this gives students an earlier exposure to this. I think the American mindset is that you need to be able to play an instrument well before you stand in front of the orchestra. Whereas in Europe, I think there is just the assumption that you can play. In fact, many of the European auditions make them play an instrument. Piano is almost guaranteed. You have to play the piano, and then if you have to play another instrument, plus you need to conduct, and you need to take lessons when you're doing your bachelor's. So in China, there's something similar too. China, I'm looking at China Conservatory and Shanghai Conservatory, and I did some field visits at these schools where they also have a bachelor program, master's program, and also a doctorate program. And lastly, Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts. So these schools were selected for a variety of reasons. Obviously, these are kind of the top schools in the various countries, and so they have credible conducting programs with also visible alumni. I think this is one important criteria that we have to look at. And also, these are institutions where I was able to gain access to the faculty, to the students. I have the existing relationships, so that allowed me to go in and collect data from them. So, methods. What did I do when I go there? Classroom observations. I sit in their conducting class. I sit in their lessons. What do they speak to the teacher about? I speak then to the faculty and to students in separate interviews. I have a list of questions that I ask them. What would you wish to have more of, in this program, or what do you feel that could be better, or what you're very happy about? I looked at also curriculum. I think that's very important because that's really the structure of what they are learning. And what kind of assessment rubrics do they have? How do they gauge whether this person has learned well or not? And lastly, performance outcomes. How are they placed in the industry or in competitions, etc. So, with all that information, and I'm still gathering more information, I had to have a form of comparative framework across these different dimensions. So about the technique, about curriculum, about the rehearsal, assessment, resources. So the table will come in the final big paper. So right now, it's, in the interest of time, it's 3:45. Oh my goodness, I have to run. Okay, so finding one. So I'm just going to summarize a few quick findings, and then we can talk about them. Firstly, I think the most important thing is about curriculum and institutional strategies. So some schools, they emphasize the importance of podium time. But this is also in relation to the resources. So one particular school that was very interesting was when I was visiting China Conservatory of Music. And they have quite an abundance of resources allocated to the conducting program for a variety of reasons. One is the new dean of the school is also a conductor, so maybe he sees the importance of the program. And so they're able to channel quite a lot of resources that they basically can work with professional orchestras on a regular basis. Students just need to sign up. And when I was interviewing one student, what shocked me was like, oh yeah, there are too many things, there are too many opportunities, I don't know what to sign up for. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Because most of the conducting programs, everybody is fighting for the opportunity. And now they are like, yeah, it's too much, I don't have time to prepare. And I'm like, okay, you don't sleep. So that's one possibility. Or in Shanghai, same country in Shanghai, where they don't have these resources, and the resources are in many ways controlled by the faculty. And of course, in terms of faculty, it's also an uneven spread. There are some faculty that are more prominent. There are some faculty who are part-time. And because of the seniority, based on kind of Asian hierarchy, they have different levels of importance too. So some people from a certain studio will get more opportunities than others. And this is just how things are run. And when I was speaking to one student in Shanghai, he mentioned, oh yeah, I asked him, how about do you organize your own ensembles? You ask your friends to play. And he said, well, in Shanghai, I have to pay my friends to play. Because when I was a student in America, we bought pizza and beer. That was, the ultimate payment. Everybody was happy to play together. But in Shanghai, because time is of premium, it was expensive. It was expensive. Whereas in the same country, in Beijing, they had the abundance of opportunity. I also talked with students in Taiwan and also in Singapore, where friends will do it out of friendship. Okay, I'm curious about this repertoire. Let's try to do this. So different institutions, and these what's the word? These methods could also coincide with their unspoken strategy. So for example, what is the importance of having a student organize their own orchestra for their final recital? It gives the initiative to the students to approach people, which is a very important skill to have as a conductor, because you need to be able to talk to people, you need to be able to organize things. But these skills are, for some students, it's very difficult because they have to put themselves out there. But on the other thinking, this is actually very beneficial because it forces the student to take the initiative to form these orchestras. And I remember also having a conversation with Bernard Lensky, who was our dean many years ago, about why at that point we didn't have a conducting program. Because he felt that these self-initiated initiatives, self-initiated projects could yield bigger results than having an institutionalized, we have this orchestra for you, you just come, you just conduct, and you go. So that's one way of thinking. On the other hand, what about students who are not so self-initiated, but they have talent? We have all these different structures that we need to take care of. So it is a big bowl of soup. But I think this is where it was interesting just to compare notes from different places. Other than the typical model of going to class, learning, how to conduct, for example, Beethoven, etc., there was also a school that talked about having real life internship. So what I spoke about at the beginning of the session is that students learn conducting in an artificial setting. But what really makes a difference is how they coordinate, how they interact with people. So in the China Conservatory, they would have guest conductors come in, and the head of the department would assign one or two people to be the host for this guest conductor. And their role in the whole week is that they will pick this conductor up from the airport, they will spend the whole week with this conductor as their assistant, getting to know them, getting to talk with them, getting to eat a lunch with them, and then understanding what it is in the craft. And I think this is quite an interesting departure from a westernized system of, okay, this is 5 o'clock, thank you very much, I'll see you tomorrow, where the lines are very, very drawn. So this way of approach to me was very shocking, because I thought, oh, does it not respect the student's time, right? There should be a cap on that. But on the other hand, this is what myself as a young conductor, as a young assistant conductor do. You make connections with these, guest conductors, you try your best to help them, and you understand what are the human dynamics required for the job. So in many ways, it's a lot more than conducting. It's a lot about human relation, it's a lot about building these things. And I go back to my personal framework of what conducting is about musically, and then realizing that there's actually a big circle around the work of a conductor. It's not just musical, but it's also about how you organize things, self-initiative, how you speak to people, how you make yourself likable to people so people want to help you. This is quite a departure from just curriculum framework. Oh my goodness, it's 3:53. Okay, now I'm just going to skip, run through this. Then, different countries have different cultures of what conductor is in the orchestra. There are some cultures where the conductor is all powerful, I say in air quotes, or there are some places where it's a more collaborative approach, where we talk about, let's mix something together, there's always a we, there's always a thank you, there's always a please, which is more Western, versus a place where in many ways the conductor is a little bit like a dictator. So there are different approaches, and really reflects teacher philosophy and ensemble realities. Lastly, resources, podium time allocation, programming policies, etc. These also differ wildly from institution to institution. I think one place that I thought was quite progressive in their thinking is that the conducting program allocates different genres. So for example, in the first year, they learn the canon. In the second year, because this is a conservatory in China, they make all the students, regardless of their majors, to learn Chinese music, because this was a very important part of their cultural identity. In the third year, it was an opera, and in the fourth year, contemporary music. So they have these kind of prescribed, which I think was very helpful. But also in some schools, it's entirely up to the students. Oh, I feel like I want to do Mahler 5. Is it really helpful? I don't know, but this is what the school would accept. So these are different approaches. I think the programming part really requires more time to look into and to examine, because how do we curate a program that is relevant today? I think that's a skill that unfortunately is not talked more of. Okay, eventually, what we want to do is we want to have success. Success could mean many things to different people. Competition success, major competitions, Gustav Mahler, Malko, Besançon, or small competitions as a stepping stone towards that, professional placement, podium readiness, and repertoire depth. So, looking at all these different models, I think in the end, the paper would then try to map the current would try to identify these different elements and what would make a program very successful, and then how can we implement it here. I think the most important part about this slide is scale and partnerships. I think this is a part that is not examined more enough in today's world because of the scarcity of resources. Again, it's always back to that. The scarcity of resources between orchestras and also academic institutions. If there are partnerships, we're able to share these resources And it's a win-win situation for many of conducting programs. And the most successful conducting programs have implemented that in some way. So closing, the implication is, I think, instead of thinking about the Asian conducting pedagogy as disrupting, I think it's really adapting the current landscape and trying to provide an equal playing field of doing a graduate education in Europe. Again, I apologize. I know this is a very a presentation with a lot of lingo, and because I look around and I realize not many people are doing graduate conducting program, and so these would make a lot more sense to people and be like, oh, I understand exactly what you're talking about. So that is one thing that I realized very quickly. But if there are any questions about my research process or the schools or interesting phenomena that I have observed, please, I'm very happy to field any questions. Thank you.
Any questions so far? Yes.
Thank you for sharing your observation, and I think it's amazing you went to Shanghai, also China Central Conservatory, and how about in European model, as we are both in the Peter Ursberg's conducting workshop in Europe, do you think we also can make more this kind of small ensemble workshop for conductor and composer? This model, I think that might be very interesting for the conductor to work with the composer, and also composer work with the conductor, and also the musician. They are quite good in skill and can be helpful for the composer and conductor too. So do you see this in Asia will be developed into not only academic but outside of academic?
Yeah, I definitely see that. Firstly, I think there's a very strong economical perspective about that. When we do new music, you don't have a big ensemble. We're not talking about a 80 people orchestra. We're talking about mainly 7 to 15 people, small ensemble. So to organize something like that would cost less. And I think there are existing models. Of course, I'm also very involved with Kaseti Ensemble and what they do every December, where it's a little bit like that. Of course, it's only mainly composition, but this could be another angle that they could explore. But I think being a staunch advocate of the program, I think the most important thing I learned from that program was just having a composer that you work with very, very closely and understanding, as a conductor, what are the things that composers do? And same thing for composers too. They understand how do you write in a way that could make their piece be more simple. I'm not saying simplistic, but you want to distill it down in the simplest form, because just for playability. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Okay, I do a very brief translation type so that if you have questions you can ask. โปรเจกต์ที่เราเสนอไปนะครับเป็นเรื่องของการสำรวจของการเรียนสอน conducting ในเอเชียนะครับลองดูว่าการสอนการสอนปัจจุบันเป็นอย่างไรบ้างและควรจะทำอย่างไรเพื่อให้ตอบโจทย์การเรียนการสอนในยุคปัจจุบันนะครับโดยที่มีเฟรมเวิร์กหลักๆที่เกี่ยวข้องกับเรื่องการเรียนการสอนการจัดประกวดอะไรก็ตามแล้วก็เรื่องสำคัญคือเรื่องของลักษณะของว่ามีอารมณ์ไหนที่มาเป็นตัวอย่างไหมว่าเกิดอะไรขึ้นบ้างนะครับทีนี้ไม่ว่าจะเกิดกรณีไหนเกิดขึ้นในสิ่งที่อาจารย์ได้เจอก็เจอว่าในแต่ละที่ก็มีวิธีการไม่เหมือนกันและแต่ละที่ก็ได้ผลคนละแบบบางที่ให้บางที่เตรียมให้หมดไปสอนเดียวก็ได้ผลแบบหนึ่งบางที่ไม่เตรียมอะไรให้เลยก็ได้ทักษะแบบหนึ่งเพราะฉะนั้นนี่จะเป็นยังอยู่ในส่วนของการที่กำลังสำรวจและจะสรุปมาใน next year in the book when will the book come out
Yeah, it should be done by the end of this year. And then, yeah.
เดี๋ยวจะมีตัวรายงานออกมาในปลายปีนี้อาจจะหาข้อมูลเพิ่มได้ครับ Any questions there? That's the translation. Okay, yes,
thank you for everyone for your attention.
Thank you very much.
And if there are any questions, please stop me anywhere and feel free to ask. Thank you.